She wasn't supposed to be on the team. Staff Sergeant Evelyn Cross had been assigned to perimeter security and equipment maintenance, military speak for stay out of the way while the real experts work. But when the most sophisticated bomb anyone had ever seen left seasoned EOD specialists baffled and defeated, someone had to try the impossible. The device had already claimed 2 buildings in coordinated attacks across the city. This was the third. The timer showed 90 seconds. The evacuation was complete except for the bomb squad, and the woman they'd called too unstable for pressure situations was about to prove them catastrophically wrong. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If stories like this deserve to be told, consider subscribing for more tales of courage against impossible odds. For 3 years, Evelyn had been the most technically skilled EOD specialist in her unit, consistently scoring highest on evaluations. For 3 years, she'd been relegated to support roles because the psychological evaluation labeled her emotionally volatile and unsuitable for high-stress situations. But here's what those evaluators missed. The bomb wasn't just a technical challenge, it was a psychological trap. 15 different trigger mechanisms designed to overwhelm methodical military thinking. The bomber had studied their procedures and built a device specifically to defeat trained specialists. But he hadn't planned for someone who thought differently, someone who could read minds as well as circuit boards. If you believe that sometimes being called too emotional is exactly the qualification needed to save lives, smash that like button to help stories like this reach more people. What country are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. We love connecting with our global community who understands that true expertise comes in many forms. But how had the military's most technically gifted EOD specialist been sidelined for 3 years? The answer lay in a single psychological evaluation that valued conventional thinking over intuitive brilliance. Staff Sergeant Evelyn Cross stood at the blast zone perimeter, watching her male colleagues work on the device that had brought half the city to a standstill. For 3 years, she had been the most technically skilled EOD specialist in her unit, consistently scoring highest on evaluations. For 3 years, she had been relegated to support roles, anything that kept her away from actual bombs. "Cross, check the equipment status." Major Harrison's voice crackled through her radio with familiar dismissiveness. "Roger, sir. All equipment functional," she responded professionally, though she'd heard this story countless times before. Through her binoculars, she saw patterns her colleagues were missing. The wire arrangement, circuit board placement, the sophisticated trigger mechanisms. It told a story she could read like a book. The bomber understood military EOD procedures intimately, possibly better than those trying to disarm it. Specialist Michael Rodriguez, the unit's most experienced EOD technician with 9 years of service and combat tours that had earned him a reputation for nerves of steel, crouched beside the bomb studying the wire schematic with the intensity of a surgeon preparing for a life-saving operation. "This is unlike anything in our training manuals," he muttered into his throat mic, his voice carrying the frustration of a professional encountering something beyond his expertise. 15 different trigger mechanisms, each one backing up the others. Whoever built this understands our procedures better than we do. Staff Sergeant James Murphy approached with careful steps, his own EOD certification representing years of methodical training that emphasized protocol over intuition. He'd seen Rodriguez work miracles with improvised explosive devices in overseas deployments, but this device seemed to challenge everything they'd learned about bomb construction. "What's your assessment, Rodriguez?" Murphy asked, noting the unusual complexity of the circuit board layout. "My assessment is that this bomber had advanced military training, possibly special operations level," Rodriguez replied, pointing to a cluster of circuits near the timer display that showed signs of professional engineering. "Look at this arrangement. Every standard approach we might use has been anticipated and countered. There are backup triggers, false circuits, decoy pathways. It's like the guy who built this attended our schools and then designed something specifically to defeat our methods. Murphy crouched beside the device, his experienced eyes taking in the sophisticated construction that seemed almost artistic in its complexity. The bomber hadn't just built a weapon, he'd created a technological challenge designed to humiliate military EOD specialists. Timeline? Murphy asked, noting the digital readout that pulsed with mechanical precision. 6 minutes, 40 seconds on the display. But given the sophistication of this device, that could be accurate or it could be psychological warfare. The bomber might want us to feel time pressure while he watches us make mistakes. Agreed. Let's try the standard power interruption approach. Cut the primary power source. Rodriguez nodded and carefully traced the power wire with his fingers, following military protocol that had served him well through dozens of successful bomb disposals. The procedure was methodical, proven, and had saved countless lives in combat zones around the world. But the moment his wire cutters made contact with the cable, the device emitted a sharp electronic beep that seemed to mock their conventional approach. The timer display flickered ominously and suddenly showed 3 minutes instead of 6, a 50% reduction that sent adrenaline coursing through both specialists. Damn it! Rodriguez jerked back from the bomb as if it had become radioactive. Anti-tamper protection system. It detected the interruption attempt and punished us by accelerating the countdown. We just lost half our remaining time. She keyed her radio. Sir, if I could make a suggestion. Cross! Harrison's voice cut her off sharply. Maintain radio discipline. The experts are working. Evelyn released the radio key, frustration building in her chest like steam in a pressure cooker. The experts were working all right, working their way into a trap that she could see as clearly as if it were outlined in neon lights. Specialist David Chen, the unit's MIT-trained electronics expert, deployed the EOD robot. Let's try remote manipulation to avoid proximity sensors. The robot arm reached the device, but contact triggered another tone. The timer jumped to 2 minutes. Motion sensors, Chen said, pulling the robot back. It responds to any approach, mechanical or human. Evelyn couldn't stay silent. Sir, I've been observing the device, and I think I see a pattern. Cross, Harrison's voice was sharp. You are assigned to equipment maintenance. Stay off this frequency. She watched as the men continued their methodical, completely wrong approach to a bomb designed to punish exactly their kind of trained thinking. At 90 seconds, panic set in. Evacuation protocol, Harrison barked. All personnel to minimum safe distance. Rodriguez packed his tools. We can't crack it, sir. This device anticipates every standard procedure. Chen secured the robot. Level of sophistication is extraordinary. Murphy raised his hands. This is beyond our capabilities. Harrison spoke into his radio with defeat. Control, EOD, team withdrawing. Building will be written off. The men ran toward evacuation, but Evelyn remained at her position, binoculars trained on the bomb. What she'd seen was impossible according to military training, but elegant in its simplicity, hidden among the technological complexity that had baffled her colleagues. With 60 seconds showing on the timer, Evelyn Cross made a decision that would either save the building or end her life. The weight of 3 years of being dismissed, of watching from the sidelines while less capable specialists handled critical situations, crystallized into a moment of absolute clarity. Sir, she said into her radio, her voice calm despite the magnitude of what she was about to propose, I can disarm the bomb. Harrison's response was immediate and incredulous. What did you say? I said I can disarm the device. I need authorization to approach. Cross, you're out of your mind. Get to the evacuation point immediately. Sir, I've been studying this bomb for the past hour while the team worked. The builder made a mistake. It's small, subtle, but it's there. I can see it. The radio crackled with tension. Around her, the evacuated street felt like a stage set for the most important performance of her life. 3 years of psychological evaluations that deemed her too emotional for high-stress situations. 3 years of being told that women couldn't handle the pressure of life-or-death decisions. 3 years of watching her technical expertise go unused while men with inferior skills took the lead. Cross, that's an order. Fall back to safe distance. Evelyn looked at the timer. 55 seconds. She thought about the families who worked in this building, the people whose lives depended on someone, anyone being willing to try the impossible. She thought about the coordinated attacks that had already claimed 2 buildings across the city, the terrorist who was probably watching news coverage right now, counting on military procedures to fail exactly as they had been designed to fail. Most of all, she thought about the bomb itself, the elegant deception hiding in plain sight, the psychological trap that had been built specifically to exploit the methodical, by-the-book thinking that characterized military EOD training. The bomber had understood her colleagues better than they understood themselves, but he hadn't planned for someone who thought differently. She turned off her radio and started running, not toward the evacuation point, but toward the bomb. "Cross!" Rodriguez's voice carried across the empty street. "What are you doing?" Evelyn reached the device and dropped to her knees beside it, her heart pounding but her hands perfectly steady. 50 seconds on the timer. Now she could see the bomb up close, and everything she'd suspected from her distant observation was confirmed. The device was a masterpiece of misdirection, 15 trigger mechanisms that looked impossibly complex, but only 3 of them were actually functional. The rest were technological theater, designed to overwhelm and confuse anyone trying to disarm it. The builder had counted on EOD specialists approaching the bomb with standard military procedures, focusing on the most obvious threats while missing the real vulnerability. There, almost hidden among the complex circuitry, was a single blue wire that appeared to be decorative, unimportant, easily overlooked. But Evelyn's trained eye could see that it was connected to the primary detonation circuit in a way that bypassed all the protective systems. Evelyn extended her hands toward the bomb as the timer showed 30 seconds. In the distance, she could hear her colleagues shouting her name, their voices carrying a mixture of fear, anger, and disbelief that cut through the morning air like gunshots. "Cross!" Their calls seemed to come from another world, a place where following orders mattered more than saving lives. "Get back here!" She tuned them out, focusing entirely on the device in front of her. The bomb's construction unfolded in her mind like a 3-dimensional puzzle she'd been studying for months rather than minutes. 15 triggers, but only 3 that actually mattered. The rest were technological theater, designed to create analysis paralysis in military specialists trained to approach problems methodically. Years of watching her colleagues' work had taught her to recognize the difference between actual complexity and apparent complexity. This bomber was sophisticated, but he was also proud. He wanted people to appreciate his engineering genius, which meant he couldn't resist including details that served his ego more than his tactical objectives. First step, disable the motion sensor. Evelyn studied the bomb carefully and located the sensor, a small infrared device positioned to detect approach from the most logical angles. But sensors had limitations, and this one could be approached from the right side without triggering its detection algorithms. Military training emphasized frontal approaches to maintain visual contact with the device, but sometimes the indirect path was safer. 25 seconds on the timer. Evelyn moved to the right side of the device and carefully cut the sensor's wire with precision that would have impressed her instructors. The bomb remained silent, confirmation that she'd correctly identified and neutralized the first layer of protection. Second step, neutralize the pressure sensor. The bomb was sitting on a pressure plate that would detonate if the device was moved or lifted. Standard procedure would be to work around the plate, but Evelyn had noticed something during her extended observation that her colleagues had missed. The plate was slightly warped, creating mechanical stress that could be relieved without triggering the sensor. 20 seconds remaining. Working with surgical precision, Evelyn inserted her utility knife under the bomb and slowly, carefully lifted it just enough to access the pressure plate mechanism. She located the sensor and cut its connecting wire, feeling a small vibration as the spring-loaded mechanism disengaged safely. Third step, disable the primary detonator. This was where her psychological analysis of the bomber would either prove accurate or get her killed. 15 seconds. 10 seconds remained when Evelyn located the primary detonator circuit, her years of training and natural talent converging in a moment of perfect clarity that seemed to slow time itself. The weight of everyone's lives, the evacuated building occupants, her colleagues, the entire city block that would be devastated if she failed, crystallized into laser focus on the wires before her. 2 wires led to the detonation system, one red, one black. In standard military EOD training, red was typically the safe wire to cut, a convention based on decades of successful bomb disposals and countless hours of classroom instruction. But this bomb had been designed by someone who understood standard military training intimately. 9 seconds. Evelyn traced the path of both wires with her eyes, following them through the circuit board with the desperation of someone whose life depended on making the right choice. The red wire led to a transistor that controlled secondary systems, lighting, timer display, backup circuits. The black wire connected more directly to what appeared to be the primary detonator housing. 8 seconds. She started to reach for the black wire, her hand moving with practiced precision, then stopped as something fundamental felt wrong. The bomber who had built this sophisticated device wouldn't make such an obvious reversal of conventional color coding. There had to be another layer to the deception, something more subtle than simply switching red and black. 7 seconds. Evelyn looked more carefully at the entire circuit board, tracing connections with desperate intensity as sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool morning air. Both the red and black wires were connected to the same relay switch, which meant cutting either one would complete the circuit and trigger immediate detonation. It was an elegant trap designed to kill anyone who got this far. 6 seconds. The real detonator control had to be somewhere else entirely, hidden among the technological complexity in a way that would be invisible to someone following standard procedures. Her eyes scanned the bomb frantically, looking for the actual trigger mechanism that the bomber had concealed among his symphony of misdirection. 5 seconds. There. The blue wire she'd noticed during her initial observation from the perimeter. It looked decorative, unimportant, like a manufacturer's quality control marker or a simple ground wire. But now, with her face inches from the circuit board, she could see that it was connected to a completely separate circuit that bypassed all the protective systems and led directly to the primary explosive charge. 4 seconds. Evelyn reached for the blue wire, her fingers moving with the certainty of someone who had finally seen through the elaborate deception. The bomber's psychology had been his downfall. His need to show off his technical sophistication had made him hide the real trigger in the most obvious place possible. 3 seconds. She grasped the wire, preparing to disconnect it from its housing. 2 seconds. In that crystalline moment of absolute clarity, she realized the full elegance of the psychological trap. The blue wire wasn't meant to be cut. It was meant to be pulled free from its connection point, breaking the circuit that held the detonator in standby mode. 1 second. Evelyn yanked the blue wire free from its connector with the same decisive motion she might use to start a motorcycle, trusting her analysis completely. 0 seconds. The timer reached 0000. The display went dark, and the bomb became nothing more than an expensive collection of inert electronics and harmless explosive material. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Evelyn remained crouched beside the disarmed bomb, hands trembling with adrenaline. The timer showed 0000, but the world hadn't ended. Then, running footsteps as her colleagues returned. "Cross!" Rodriguez reached her first. "Are you okay? Is it safe?" "I'm fine. Device is neutralized." Harrison arrived, composure shattered. "What did you do?" The bomber made a critical error. The blue wire that looked decorative was actually primary detonator control. Everything else was misdirection. Chen examined the disarmed bomb with wonder. "How is this possible? We analyzed the circuits for hours. You looked for complexity where simplicity was hiding," Evelyn replied. "The bomber counted on military training, making you focus on obvious threats while missing the real trigger." Murphy shook his head. "So in 90 seconds, you solved what stumped 3 specialists with 20 years combined experience. I had an advantage. 3 years watching from outside, seeing how standard procedures become limitations." The following day, Major Harrison called Evelyn into his office for what she assumed would be a disciplinary hearing about disobeying direct orders. She sat across from his desk, prepared to defend her actions and accept whatever consequences came with saving lives through insubordination. "Cross," Harrison began. his tone carrying a weight she'd never heard before. "What you did yesterday was either the most reckless thing I've ever witnessed or the most brilliant. I've been trying to decide which." Evelyn maintained her professional composure despite the uncertainty. "Sir, I understand that I violated protocol by approaching the device without authorization. I take full responsibility for my actions." "Your actions," Harrison repeated, leaning back in his chair and studying her with new eyes. "You mean the actions that saved a 12-story office building, prevented what could have been dozens of casualties, and stopped a coordinated terrorist attack in its tracks? Those actions?" "Yes, sir." Harrison opened a thick file on his desk and began reading. "I spent most of last night reviewing your complete service record, Cross. 3 years of perfect scores on technical evaluations. Consistently, the highest marks in your EOD certification classes. Recommendations from instructors who called you naturally gifted and intuitively brilliant at explosive ordnance disposal. Simulation scores that exceed those of specialists with twice your experience." He looked up from the file, his expression mixing regret with newfound respect. "And for 3 years, I've had you checking equipment and maintaining perimeter security while less qualified specialists handled the actual bombs. I need you to help me understand why I made that decision." Evelyn chose her words carefully, aware that this conversation would determine not just her own future, but possibly the futures of other women in similar situations. "I believe it's because you and the other senior staff had concerns about my stability under pressure, sir." "Stability under pressure," Harrison repeated slowly. "The psychological evaluation from your initial assignment described you as emotionally volatile and prone to stress responses that could compromise mission effectiveness. The evaluator recommended that you be assigned to support roles where your technical skills could be utilized without exposing you to high-stress tactical situations." He paused. "Do you remember that evaluation, Cross?" "Yes, sir. Every word of it. Yesterday you functioned under the highest possible stress, a 90-second countdown with thousands of lives potentially at stake, and you performed flawlessly. So either that psychological evaluation was completely wrong, or you've undergone a remarkable transformation. Which is it?" Evelyn met his gaze directly. "With respect, sir, I think the evaluation was based on incorrect assumptions about how women respond to pressure. The psychologist saw emotional awareness as weakness rather than recognizing it as a tool for reading situations that men might miss." Harrison nodded slowly. "Explain." "The bomber who built that device was counting on us to approach it with standard military logic, systematic, methodical, focused on the most obvious threats. But bomb making is also a psychological activity. The builder was trying to communicate with us to show off his sophistication and prove that he could outsmart military training. I was able to see through his deception because I wasn't just analyzing the technology, I was reading his mind." Harrison walked to his office window. "I'm making changes to unit assignments, Cross. You're promoted to lead EOD specialist." "Sir, Rodriguez becomes your second. Chen and Murphy work under your supervision. You'll train new personnel and develop protocols based on psychological analysis in bomb disposal." The opportunity was overwhelming. 3 years of support roles, now reshaping how military approached its most dangerous specialty. "Pentagon has noticed what happened yesterday," Harrison continued. "They're reviewing our entire training program to understand how someone with your skill was overlooked for 3 years. There's one more thing. They want you for advanced training at Army EOD school, working with FBI behavioral specialists to understand how bombers think." 2 weeks later, Evelyn led her first official EOD mission. A suspicious device in a federal building garage required her new team's expertise. "Assessment, boss?" Rodriguez asked with genuine respect. Evelyn studied the device remotely. "Classic IED with defensive modifications. The builder wants recognition but lacks sophisticated technical skills." "Approach strategy?" Chen asked. "We analyze the bomber's psychology first. Federal building placement suggests political grievance. Early morning timing suggests message over casualties. The operation succeeded in 20 minutes using psychological profiling rather than hours of conventional procedures. 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Evelyn Cross developed a new course at Fort Lee. Psychological analysis in bomb disposal operations. Forget everything about cut the red wire, she told trainees. Bomb makers don't follow rules, they follow psychology. She showed them the device that changed her career. 15 triggers, multiple defenses, but the real complexity was psychological misdirection. The bomber's ego created vulnerability. Students learned to read bomber psychology through placement, timing, materials, and design choices. Your most important tool isn't wire cutters, she concluded. It's understanding the person who built what you're trying to disarm. 1 year later, the Pentagon called. They wanted Evelyn to head a task force developing psychological profiling for asymmetric warfare. Not just bombs, but cyber attacks and insider threats. I accept, she said, with 2 conditions. I maintain operational EOD connection, and we ensure female specialists receive equal consideration for high-stress roles. Agreed, the colonel replied. Your case has already changed how we evaluate military talent. The CROSS protocol had resolved 12 major incidents while reducing average EOD operation time by 37%. 5 years after those 90 seconds, Colonel Evelyn Cross watched a new generation implement her protocols. The morning was crisp, reminiscent of that day when everything changed, but now she stood as the senior officer overseeing operations that routinely saved lives using techniques born from her desperate improvisation. Sergeant Lisa Chen, whose own career had been shaped by the opportunities Evelyn's breakthrough had created for women in EOD roles, knelt beside a sophisticated device that bore the psychological signatures Evelyn had learned to recognize. The student had become the teacher, implementing protocols that were now standard across all military EOD operations. Assessment, Evelyn asked, noting how Chen's analysis reflected training that incorporated psychological profiling as fundamental curriculum rather than revolutionary innovation. Sophisticated device with multiple psychological layers, Chen replied, her voice carrying the confidence that came from understanding not just the technology, but the mind behind it. The builder wants us to know he's technically capable, but the placement and timing suggest he's more interested in demonstrating superiority than causing mass casualties. Approach strategy? We're going to profile the bomber first, then use that psychological analysis to guide our technical approach to the device. Evelyn nodded approvingly as she watched Chen's team implement the systematic approach to psychological profiling that had grown out of her own intuitive leap years earlier. The protocols had been refined, systematized, and incorporated into training curricula worldwide, but the core insight remained unchanged. Understanding the bomber's psychology was often more important than understanding the bomb. Colonel, Chen's voice carried a note of excitement as her analysis progressed. I think this bomber made the same type of ego-driven error you identified in your original case study. He's hidden the real trigger mechanism in plain sight, counting on us to focus on the obviously sophisticated elements while missing the simple solution. The device was disarmed successfully using psychological profiling techniques that had become as routine as checking for anti-tamper devices. What had once been revolutionary insight was now standard procedure, taught to every EOD specialist from their first day of training. Excellent work, Evelyn smiled, watching as Chen's team secured the scene with professional efficiency. Remember, every bomb tells a story about the person who built it. Your job is learning how to read that story faster than they expect you to. Years later, EOD training programs worldwide included psychological analysis as fundamental curriculum alongside traditional technical skills. Evelyn's 90-second decision had transformed an entire military discipline, proving that sometimes being called too emotional was exactly the qualification needed to save lives. The woman they had dismissed as unsuitable for pressure situations had redefined how the military approached its most dangerous challenges.